What's the eternal principle?
Brahman.
Which is?
Well, we call it God, but that personifies it, you see.
It is the experience of the eternity.
Yeah.
The experience of the eternal.
As what you are.
Yes.
I would say.
That whatever eternity is here right now.
Or nowhere else. Or everywhere else. If you don't experience it now, you're never going to get it. Because when you get to heaven, that's not eternal, that's just everlasting. Heaven lasts a long time. It's not eternal, it's everlasting.
I don't follow that now.
The eternal is beyond time. The concept of time shuts out eternity.
Time is our invention.
Our experience, yeah. But the ultimate, unqualified mystery is beyond human experience. It becomes inflected. As they say, there is a condescension on the part of the infinite to the mind of man, and that is what looks like God.
Preach it, Papa Joe. Preach the gospel of transcendence and catching that myth like a modern-day Tom Sawyer. Preach it from the sky and preach it from the depths of Hades. We love ya. And Joseph Campbell and other lords of the unreal will be abundant in this eternal now. In reality, this September, the year of our Demiurge 2018. That is because we will be covering a fantastic movie created by a great mind and someone who I considered a true friend of Gnosticism and true citizen of the virtual Alexandria. That is Robert Bonomo, director and writer of the 21 Faces of God, a visually orgasmic and gnosis-ejaculating film that expresses the divine through a journey across the tarot deck. Heresy shouldn't be this much fun, but it just is. It just is.
The cosmic ballet goes on.
Does anyone want to switch seats?
Welcome to the desert of the real. Welcome to Aeon Bite Gnostic Radio. We don't take prisoners but liberate them. We are not the final authority on anything, but hope to be an endless possibility for everything. After all, you are the final authority, have always been before they made you forget, and made you forget how beautiful you were. Together, we're creating better than the creator gods and their butt slaves in the establishment, always trying to sell us that Ouroboros oil. Most of all, like Robert in The 21 Faces of God, we're writing our own gospel and living our own myth.
It's been a brilliant journey of self-awakening. Now you've simply got to ask yourself this. What is happiness to you?
I am Abraxas, the terrible god above God as the ancients knew him. That sanity-destroying manifestation of the pleroma, as Jung claimed. That supreme solar logos, as Basilides contended. That seal that protected the Knights Templar treasure. Oh, that rooster-headed hybrid deity that, like Baphomet, remains unfinished, and we are creating together for ultimate liberation and a better future.
Sticking feathers up your butt does not make you a chicken.
Like Vance likes to say, who needs Keck when you got Peck? Abraxas comes to you in his meat sack incarnation of Miguel Connor, no longer broadcasting at the lawful and frigid dystopia of Chicago, but in the Illinois countryside near a town called Wakanda. For real. And actually not too far away from a town called Woodstock, where the movie Groundhog Day was filmed. So the high weirdness continues to follow.
What would you do if you were stuck in one place, and every day was exactly the same, and nothing that you did mattered?
Now that sums it up for me.
But you are Abraxas too, as you seek ultimate consciousness expansion and all boundary eradication. We are together that Pompatus of Gnosis. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being yourself, your true self. Thanks for existing and shining like a crazy diamond.
By the power of truth, I, while living, have conquered the universe.
So excited to promote Robert's The 21 Faces of God. Check it out as it's free on YouTube. Our show notes have all the info on finding out about Robert and his movie and other works. Beyond the film, we'll be talking some politics and social issues from an anarchist point of view. After all, anarchy simply means without archons. And the Gnostics were accused as being some of history's first anarchists.
People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people.
Gotta bring it all down, you see. Martin Luther once said, "We are all under the same roof, but the house is on fire." Or as author Arundhati Roy wrote, "Our strategy should be not only to confront empire, but to lay siege to it, to deprive it of oxygen, to shame it, to mock it. With our art, our music, our literature, our stubbornness, our joy, our brilliance, our sheer relentlessness, and our ability to tell our own stories. Stories that are different from the ones we're being brainwashed to believe."
No matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world.
By the ghost of Gary Gygax, it's not easy, the fight of the true seeker warrior. Like recovering Gnostic Jeremy Puma wrote in his book, This Way, "Listen, Gnosis tells you that the world sucks. They really are out to get you, and you don't know jack about anything. Anyone who tells you anything different is trying to get you in bed. It's not easy, and it sometimes seems there's no way to make sense of a senseless machine that is reality."
Why, oh why didn't I take the blue pill?
Take Dorothy, for example. Dorothy used to come to a Friday night AA meeting I attended in Chicago. She was an elderly woman barely making it in assisted living, who took a long bus, often in bad weather, to make it to this meeting. Although she had many years of sobriety under her belt, life and the disease of alcoholism had taken its toll. Yet she arrived every Friday with her walker in good spirits. And she always shared her life with honesty and humility and gratitude. One time before Thanksgiving, Dorothy was very excited. She told the group that she had finally mended bridges with her daughter after so many years. What's more, Dorothy was going to spend the holiday with her daughter, a first and forever. She was so happy, and we were very happy for her.
We have just lost cabin pressure.
After the Thanksgiving weekend, I showed up to that Friday meeting. As I made that crappy AA coffee, another member told me Dorothy had died. What had happened? Well, during the Thanksgiving dinner, her dentures had popped out while eating turkey, and she choked to death. Right there, right before her daughter. What the hell was that? Her effing dentures? What was I supposed to do with this information? Does this mean life remains a cruel jape, that infinite jest of Wallace, or the great joke God played on mortals, as Robert Frost wrote? Or is it more bittersweet, and those few minutes a mother finally bonded with her estranged daughter was all that mattered? the scant and real moments of true joy we are afforded as mortals. Perhaps it's something else. I don't know.
All life is sorrowful, is the first Buddhist saying, and it is. I mean, it wouldn't be life if there were not temporality involved, which is sorrow, loss, loss, loss.
What I do know is that, as some have said, we never die as long as someone remembers us. Our souls are made of stories, as Doctor Who said, and we can speak each other's stories in order to, as Campbell said, experience eternity. Dorothy will never die as long as her story is told, with many lessons and dimensions, like all stories, expressing the horror and beauty of this fallen cosmos.
If we have souls, they are made of the love we share, undimmed by time, unbound by death.
For me, Dorothy, you are a testament of perseverance and hope and love and simply always moving forward in life, in the snow with a walker. In this timeless tale, you are sitting across the table at Thanksgiving with your daughter after so many trials and enjoying a brief moment of a love that will never end. But you are also always choking to death on the floor with the person you abandoned due to your addiction. She's screaming in horror across time and space, heartbroken forevermore. The horror and beauty of a fallen cosmos. What do you think? Thinking doesn't matter. We need to tell each other's story forever. And like Arundhati said, make them better. As we recall, we can bring down empire that makes us age and curses us with dependences and provides crappy walkers and loosens our dentures so we can't speak or enjoy those moments in life to the end. It's not easy, the fight of the true seeker warrior.
I know we're all pretty small in the big scheme of things. And I suppose the most you can hope for is to make some kind of difference. But what kind of difference have I made? What in the world is better because of me?
Relating to all of this, for members and non-members, we end with some very powerful music by the talented band Future Primitives. Specifically and appropriately a song called Black Iron Prison. But enough of my drivel, as it's getting longer than a McCain funeral. Led us to the interview with Robert Bonomo. This is the AM Byte interview, and with us we definitely have the pleasure of having back Robert Bonomo. How are you doing today, Robert?
Oh, I'm doing great, Miguel. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's definitely a pleasure. Like I said, when I think of people that really belong in the virtual Alexandria through all these years of broadcasting, I always think, oh, Robert should definitely be a citizen. He's a kindred spirit to the Gnostic cause, or doom, or whatever you want to call it.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
And, of course, somebody who's certainly a citizen of the virtual Alexandria, and that is Vance Sachi. How are you doing today, Vance? Thanks for being here, too.
No problem. Unusually after a hard day's worth of work, so I have half my pneuma tied behind my back.
It's been a hard day's work. Oh, well.
Yeah.
Well, here we are. We are escaping. So, anyway, great to have you on, Robert. So, tell us, God, there's so much to talk about and unpack since we last talked, and that was like 3 years ago. And I wanted to lead in a bit heavy because
Sure.
It's been a burning question. I remember, again, it really is about 3 years. It was August 2015 since you honored the show. And
Wow.
Yeah, time flies, my friend. But one of the things we talked about is how these were Gnostic times, and we both kind of gave our reasons and whatever. And now I'm like, oh my God, if those were Gnostic times, it is really ramped up. The high weirdness is ramped up. I mean, wouldn't you agree? I mean, what happened to reality? Sometimes I think David Bowie died and everything is falling apart.
Yeah, these are absolutely extraordinary times. But I mean, I have to say, for me, it's actually really enjoyable to see the archons collapsing, all of them. I think it's beautiful, you know, to see the Facebooks and the Googles and the Trumps and all these people just collapsing on top of each other in just this massive creative destruction. These are truly Gnostic times. It's fabulous.
Yes, it is chaos. So what do you think? I mean, how did you feel, or what your views were with the whole, again, weirdness with the Trump election, the Keck movement, and everything that's going on? What do you think about this?
Well, I have to say, making this film, when I was working on The Fool, I really got into the whole trickster archetype. And Lewis Hyde has written a lot about the trickster. And I think, in a sense, Trump is the trickster. But before anyone gets too upset, remember, from the Jungian point of view, the trickster is unconscious. He's completely unconscious. He just sticks his finger where there's energy, where there's taboo, where there are problems, riles people up. That's the trickster motif. So I think what happened was, as the collective narrative began to collapse, appears the trickster to sort of just demolish it. And hopefully, out of all of this, something new will arise. That's why these are absolutely Gnostic times. Because the emperor has no clothes. We're beginning to see who the archons are. And they're all of them. There are no good guys in this story.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think what did Gordon White once said? It's all a Game of Thrones. It's basically a war in heaven with all these powers and going at each other. And like you said, Trump is disrupting and really exposing the dark underbelly of the world, isn't he?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about the dark state. I mean, the dark state, yes, and the deep state. But I mean,
your Star Wars metaphors are mixing with your conspiracy theory metaphors.
And the Death Star, too. Don't forget that.
Oh, that's right. You started. Yes, exactly. Totally. But I mean, it's amazing. Now you see the left is friends with the CIA and the FBI, and you have the right pointing their finger at the CIA, the Department of Justice as the bad guys. It's hysterical, no? It's beautiful to see all their narratives get completely confused and just begin to crumble. No, that's why it's important to step back, not get involved. It's like a Dodgers Giants game. No, enjoy the game. If you want to pick a side, okay, but your life doesn't depend on it, right?
Exactly, and of course, it should be known to the audience that you are definitely a post-partisan. You were once a liberal, and then you've sort of evolved into an anarchist. So you agree that we lived in a false dichotomy of left and right.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it was Coke or Pepsi. That's what we chose. I mean, that whole concept of democracy, it's just absolutely absurd, no? And now, as you get some voices who actually move outside the mainstream, I mean, look how they're just chopping away at them. The Alex Joneses on one side, or the Jimmy Dores on the other side. You see them both. They're terrified of anyone who's outside of that, that Coke Pepsi model. It's wonderful.
Exactly. Very Gnostic times. And do you see this maybe as, I think this really is as above, so below? This is a manifestation of higher spiritual worlds, or perhaps this is an unraveling of the collective unconscious? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, my belief system is, I would say, profoundly Gnostic. So to say that this world is perfect or beautiful, or there's something profoundly wrong with this world, I think, and that's a real Gnostic feeling, no?
Right.
But also there's an evolution. So the positive side to the Gnostic, I think, theology or vision of the world is that we evolve towards something. And as long as that evolution involves increasing awareness, that we're becoming more aware and more conscious, it's a good thing. So all of this destruction, I think, is leading us to a greater awareness. So the long term, I think, is positive. And that's how you get the reflection as above, so below, because it's that expansion of consciousness. And it's happening. It's totally happening. And you can't stop it. You know, I had a conversation the other day, very interesting, with an older French woman, very elegant, well-traveled, intelligent. And we were talking about the 5G networks and the Internet of Things and that whole stuff. And I said, you know, you can't stop this. I mean, she's like, we must stop this. It's like, what are you going to stop? I mean, imagine when the book appeared, or the spoken word, or the written word. Were we going to stop it? We can't stop it. We just have to go, and just, you know, hopefully we will evolve to a higher consciousness. I believe we will, if we can escape this world in the archons.
Oh, yeah. But what do you think of this, Robert? I mean, do you think that the United States as a concept is unraveling? And of course, I'm sure you would like to use alchemical terms, because I know you're into alchemy, and we are the massa confuse, as they say, and right. Something will come out of it, maybe a phoenix of the ashes or something. Or some might say this is just empire sort of in its last throes of death, which happens to so many empires. But do you think there ever was this idealistic America? Sometimes I feel it's been corrupted to the core for maybe 100 years or more.
Yeah. I do have a real sympathy for sort of that Jeffersonian, that idealism, that Jeffersonian feeling of an America that had a vision. But I think there was at a time, I think we have to be careful with sort of the moral applications of good or bad. I don't think there ever was a good America or a bad America, but there was, I think at least when I was younger, I'm 50, so I remember the Cold War and all that. There was a collective narrative. So the narrative did work, and it worked pretty well for about, pretty long time. That narrative there is no collective narrative anymore. So this is the dissolution, and my feeling of the dissolution of that greater narrative. And for example, having lived in China, since we spoke, I taught in China. I was teaching at a university there.
Wow.
You see a collective narrative that people buy into in China. So the Chinese buy into even though it has some incredible contradictions, in general, the Chinese buy into it. And you can see how we have stopped buying into it. So I think it's more of a problem of the narrative. The story is gone. We have to find a new one.
Oh, that's well said. I mean, even I think in one of your movies, or you quoted Joseph Campbell saying we need a new myth. In a way, society and cultures need a myth. Even if it's a little lie, it's something we can come together. And as you mentioned in our last interview, that's gone. You talk about how even in the 60s there was tension and spiritual seeking, but people really bought into the idea that our government was good and the American dream was good. And like you say, now that's all gone. Nobody believes in any of this.
Right. I think because in the 60s there was an idealism that it could be improved, that we could create this greater society. But I think today it seems to me a lot more like the beginnings of a civil war. And the new myth, talking about the new myth, this is something I've been thinking about a lot, is, for example, the truthers, the whole 9/11 movement. That is a myth. That is a very powerful myth. Right. Now, and it's like, for example, when you talk to now there are fundamentalist truthers who believe there were no buildings or no planes or whatever, but that's not really very interesting. What's interesting is their myth. And there is something to that truther myth, the Matrix myth. Remember Truman's, the Truman Show myth, all in that same period of 1988, 1999, 2000, in that time, something emerged out of that. And when you see that connected with AI in the future, that's where I see the new myth coming.
Oh, indeed. And I always thought it was fascinating, as you mentioned, that 9/11 really might have torn something in the fabric of the cosmos. I mean, it was Maybe, I mean, obviously there are events in history which much more people die. It's a tragic thing than 4,000 or 5,000 people die in a war. 10,000 people might die, or natural disaster. But 9/11 was really a psychic trauma and very symbolical that spread across the world. And I always thought, as you spoke, maybe that did tear a fabric in the cosmos. Maybe that it really brought in a lot of Mandela effects, which we see so much. What do you think of that?
Absolutely, but we should preface that by saying in the West, because I never forget in front of a classroom of Chinese students, 70, undergraduate Chinese students, I asked them, when you think of 2001, what do you think of? And you know what their answer was?
What?
China entered the WTO.
Yes.
And I remember thinking, what? But then it hits you and you say, this is the largest country on earth. And for them, entering the WTO was much more important than 9/11. So we got to keep that in mind too.
Yes, indeed. Of course, the West and the East. And again, we're talking about narratives and myths that we live by. So, and of course, we want to get to your excellent movie, which I saw, but of course, I wanted to bat some things around so the audience gets to know you more. So you yourself, as we spoke last time, and as we know, you were once upon a time a marketing guy, ran the marketing for a financial center. You were, an upstanding liberal, perhaps neoliberal. I know once upon a time I drank a lot of neocon Kool-Aid about 15 years ago. I admit it. I mean, I was part of the system. I hadn't taken any red pills. So what exactly changed that made you evolve into anarchism and the esoterica?
Yeah, great question. I would say, so when I was about 15 or 16, I had what the Jungians call those big dreams. So I had that whole thing of these just very apocalyptic, massive dreams. And I had a psilocybin experience that was just the true spiritual psilocybin experience, no? But it happened to me and I kind of packed it away and went on and tried to get my job in marketing and live the life the normal middle class life. The next thing, but the splinter was there, no? And the next thing that happened, working for a bank, I began to understand the whole narrative of money. And when that opened, that cracked the nut. There was no going back. When I understood the whole process of how money is created and how nobody understands it, when I was finally able to accept that, that was when there was no going back. There was no going back.
So you saw money maybe as magic, dark magic or something like that, or you just saw how insane was that we were buying into the system, the whole money system and debt and so forth?
Yeah, just how banks operate. So the collective narrative, if we want to put it in Gnostic terms, of sort of the archons, no? Well, there's this money, you go to a bank, they lend it to you, you work for 30 years, you give it back to them. When you understand the mechanics of that process, you think, well, why was I not taught this if I was a history major or got, a master's in basically an MBA? I worked in a bank, and why didn't I ever understand this? And then, that began to mix with, I kind of become an atheist, and then I got involved with Zen, which I think is kind of pretty common. You're raised a strict Catholic, become an atheist, then you kind of go to Zen, and then you kind of work your way back.
Right.
I think that story, there's thousands of us.
Right. You got to come home for a bit.
Yeah, exactly. And you come home. So that's where it all kind of developed. And then I would say in 2008, the universe because I had always been an aspiring novelist. So I wrote a couple novels and I go back into marketing. And finally, the universe gave me a real swift kick with the pointy shoe, as the Irish say, in about 2008. And there was no going back.
What would you suggest if somebody really wants to understand how the money system is? For example, I've read books like Tragedy and Hope by Quigley and a few other books, but they're very dense. I mean, you really have to do your homework. What would you suggest, a movie or a book to see where they can sort of get some of those red pills that woke you up and said, enough is enough?
Well, it's so complicated and it's so simple that I'm going to do something I shouldn't do. I'm going to recommend one of my own articles, okay? So I wrote an article called The Moral Hazards of Modern Banking. It's on my website, The Cactus Land. Just read that, and it will explain the mechanics of how a loan is created and how money is created. Because are you familiar with Yuval Harari, the Israeli historian?
No, I'm not.
He gives an interesting explanation. He's a good one to look into. He has a TEDx talk where he talks about money. And it's interesting because money is the only narrative that we all believe. So you could go from radical Islamist terrorists to the CIA. They all buy into the money myth. And it's a very interesting idea because money is the ultimate myth. The dollar myth is without a doubt the most powerful myth in the world. If that myth ever collapses, we're in serious trouble, very serious trouble. But the money is a myth. It's a story. I used to do this to my students. I would say, I'd pull out a $50 bill and say, hey, will you give me your pen for $50? And they say, yeah. And then I would write Bank of Robert 50 and say, will you give me your pen for this? And they'd say, no. What's the difference? It's the myth, the myth of the dollar. No? And it's all based on that. The euro's based on, it's all pegged to the dollar. So it's a story. But yeah, read that article. And Yuval Harari has a TEDx talk where he talks about the myth of money. I think he does an excellent job with describing that.
Well, you heard it here. Check it out. Yes, Robert writes some great articles in different places. I've always enjoyed them. So let's talk a little bit about anarchism. I know we discussed it last time, but it's good to have a refresher course. If somebody's interested in anarchism, or maybe you can explain just briefly what is anarchism, something that I've definitely been into for a few years, but I'm probably not as engaged as I should be.
Yeah, that's a difficult question because you can go from the extremes of anarchism, from Bakunin all the way to, I don't know, Ron Paul, right? You can go from the extreme left to the extreme right and you'll find anarchists. But I come from it from more of the libertarian side. And on the anarcho-capitalist concept of anarchy is massive distrust in government. So government is the root of all corruption, all evil, and all violence. There is nothing more violent than a government. And what the anarchist movement pushes for is the reduction of government to its absolute minimum. I mean, if you look at the 20th century and look at the number of people killed by governments, I mean, the numbers are just astronomical. Astronomical. So that's the basic concept of anarchism, that the ultimate mafia is the government. There's no greater mafia. And the banksters are obviously in bed with the governments and the military complex and all these people and the corporations and the corporate state, which is the fascist state. And that's what the anarchist basically believes.
Right. Yeah. When people ask me about anarchism, I say, well, you just have to quote Alan Moore in V for Vendetta, which is people shouldn't be afraid of their government. Government should be afraid of their people. And that's not what we have today anywhere.
Absolutely. That's exactly it. They should come to us. What can I do for you? For all the taxes you've paid me, what can I do for you? And it's absolutely the opposite. We have government. The government is running around arresting people left and right, starting wars, killing people, threatening people, filling them with fear. We don't need that. We don't need that.
No, we don't. But I guess the question is, how do we break it? I mean, we should have a system of checks and balances. The government should be afraid of us. Where does it start? Is it because as people, we have fears and we begin handing over our rights to them? I mean, what's the issue? How does this get out of hand, and how do we make anarchy, which basically means without archons in Greek, which is what we all agree here, how do we stop or increase the anarchy?
Well, it all goes back to, if you think why can you domesticate cows or horses but not cats? Because animals have a structure, or sheep, for example. There's a hierarchical structure, and you replace the alpha sheep with a human, and they all follow you. So humans, we have this built into us. We're programmed to follow. So to be an anarchist is to break with your programming. So it's not easy. We all have that tendency, right? So the model is because when someone replaces that ultimate alpha male, what do? That's what you remember in the film on the section on archetypes. I show Putin walking up the steps.
Yes, it was a great scene. Yeah, very powerful.
All of that is to enforce their status as the alpha male. So what we first should do is reduce the narrative around government. There's nothing sacred about a government. The government is just, it's just another corporation that's there to serve us. And so strip away all of the archetypes and the symbolism, strip it away. And then the second thing is real money. We can't allow banks and governments to control money. Money is work, and we should control our work. We shouldn't give away our future work to governments or banks or corporations. So first is the myth, and second, we need to take back real money. And if we can control those two things, where we don't glorify governments and presidents and military leaders, I think that's a good place to start.
I would agree. I mean, my only argument, I've always been, since you might say, woke up in an anarchist/libertarian, but of course, I've always believed in having a strong safety net. I mean, I believe that the downtrodden and the poor and the sick should be taken care of as much as possible. As Jesus says in the Gospels, the least of our brothers, we must do for the least of our brothers what we would do for our Savior, for our heroes. So how can anarchism or even libertarianism work to get, to help to have a good social net for people who need it?
Yeah, and I would say two things. First, I'm not a dogmatic libertarian, so if there are any serious libertarians out there, they're going to cringe. But my feeling is bring it closer to home. So, for example, the safety net should be run and organized on a local level. And that it doesn't mean it has to be private. If a community, even a state decides, we want to have a single player healthcare plan, I think that the United States would be great if we had some states that had that. We could see how it worked. Maybe it'll work great. Who knows? But from the federal government, we need to bring the power back to the people. And then we can give it to local governments or regional governments or state governments or something like that. So I'm not ultimately dogmatic. I agree with you. I think a good society is a society where there is a safety net. Now, I would draw the line at education. I think education has to be completely ripped away from all forms of government and churches.
Oh, I would agree with you that. I mean, and what you said makes sense. But I guess the other argument, too, would be, and this is something that the occultist Sticks and Hammer likes to say. He says, well, yes, have your little anarchist society, because in about 5 minutes, another outside government's going to send an army and conquer you. So what do you think about that argument?
Yeah, but I mean, if you look at our federal government, if we got rid of all of these agencies and we were left with a State Department, a military that, say, worked on a third of its current budget, that would be, I mean, I'm not saying eliminate. I'm not a dogmatic libertarian where we have to have no government. No, yeah, we need a government to protect our borders and have a State Department to deal with other nations and whatnot. But we just have to reduce it so it doesn't control us, that we control it. That they come begging to us for extra money and we decide yes or no. Do you really need that plane or don't you? No. Yeah, but I mean, of course, I don't believe we should just eliminate all governments tomorrow. That would probably, he's right. I mean, if we did that, we'd definitely have problems.
Do we have any examples for the audience of libertarian or / anarchist communities that work in the world? I know I follow one that's in Acapulco, Mexico. That's sort of an anarchist community that's growing. Do you have any examples, perhaps in history or anything like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've actually never really thought about it. I mean, when you study history, it's just all so horrible that, yeah.
Well, you did bring an example in our last interview, and that one was, well, there's two examples that we talked about. One was Alcoholics Anonymous, which is a very decentralized system, and of course, the Archons love centralization because it controlled the narrative. And AA somehow it's based on a common attraction and principles. There's no centralized place. There's a place in New York, but every chapter does whatever they want, and it works. And of course, the ancient Gnostics have been called anarchists, even the Manichaeans. They had a centralized hub, and they were, you might say, out there evangelizing, but everything was very loose. The communication was there. There was no punitive courts or strong laws and everything. And the Manichaeans were really the first global religion in the world. But at the same time, they were very anarchist. So 2 examples right there, right, Robert?
Yeah, exactly. And for example, the idea that laws should be renewed every 20 years, every generation. We renew all of our laws. So do we really need this law? Yes or no? Let each generation choose its laws. There are so many things we can do without violence. I'm not saying we need a violent revolution, but if we reached a society like that, it would be much more just, I think.
Agreed. And what about you, Vince? Do you have a question or comment or insight for Robert and even myself in the audience? What do you think? I know, well, you're out there too with your views.
Oh, yeah. This is something I've thought about for years and years and years and years, because basically I'm kind of like you, Robert. I'm libertarian. One observation I've made is that the archon, I have this thing, leaders versus the bleeders, right? So if you have any kind of organization, you need a leader usually, because nobody wants to do all the work themselves. They want to say, hey, we'll delegate all these things to you. And if he turns into a bleeder, you're in trouble. So I think what the founding fathers did, and this is what I'm asking your opinion of, is they had the idea by creating 3 branches of government that they'd fight with each other and stay out of our way. What do you think of that, about that, to get rid of the archons? Because I think they'll always be there. You just got to get them fighting with each other so that they won't bother us as much.
Yeah, and I think as Americans, we're fortunate that we do have this Constitution that even if you go to the extremes that we have today, we can all pretty much agree on that basic social contract. And so, I think you're absolutely right. But I mean, look what's happening today with, for example, the deep state. So there's a state behind the state, and you connect that with corporate donors and the banksters and the Fed, and it's completely been demolished. So I agree with you. If we could roll all that back, we could all possibly agree on that one founding document that we have.
I don't think they do, though. The problem I see, what's going on now, and the basis of the schism in the country, is that about 50% of the people agree in the sovereignty of the individual, and that the government should respect that, and the government exists to service the individual, just as you were saying. But the other half that supports socialism, I don't care how much they try to redefine it, socialism is the supremacy of the government and the subjection of the individual to the government. 50% of people nowadays believe that, and I don't think that's compatible with the Constitution.
Yeah. I mean, actually, you're right. And there's a wonderful phrase that if by the time you're 20, you're not a socialist, you don't have a heart. And if by the time you're 40, you're not a conservative, you don't have a brain. And
yeah, I've heard that.
And it really does, and
then I have neither.
Neither do I.
Yeah, we're all in that boat.
Yeah. But hey, we're having fun, right? So that's important.
Oh yeah.
But what was I going to say? That this generation, the millennials, they were coddled. And there's a lot of research on this, on how in the 80s there were some children who were being kidnapped and whatnot. And so the parents became very kind of paranoid. So they didn't experience that sovereignty as kids. I mean, I remember as a kid, I did whatever I wanted to.
Yeah, we were out all the time. Streets, whatever. Our parents said, just go outside. See you in
it was always, did you do your homework? Of course. Yes. All right, go, and that was it.
Yeah, me too.
Hey, I was a reasonably okay student. It's not like I didn't get in any horrible problems. So, my parents did a good job. But they gave us sovereignty. We were able to socialize, get in fights, have problems, get over them. So I think that's a little bit of the problem with it's not their fault. It really isn't their fault. They just haven't experienced that They haven't experienced really going out in the world and taking, the school of hard knocks. So yeah, we have that problem, and it's scary. And I would recommend send them to China, go to the old Soviet Union and see what a society like that really is. And they'll come running back libertarians, I promise you.
If we wait long enough, they won't have to go.
Yeah, no kidding. The way things are going. So, yeah. Well, it's something to explore some more. And of course, everybody should make up their own mind. Find, as Joseph Campbell said, find your bliss, your own voice, your own narrative. I mean, I'm thinking of like when I interviewed Bruce Chilton and he talked about the early Christians before the church got to them. They were anarchists. At the same time, they were the social justice warriors of their times, disrupting the empire and getting in it every way. But they were also socialists. Everything was the poor and the needy got their stuff. Everything was split. And these Christians were very happy and they were very unique. So, again, it's something to explore, and we'll definitely continue. But I certainly, why don't we get to your film? Maybe tell the audience what inspired you to do this wonderful visual that I really enjoyed.
I think last time I can't remember. I think last time I was on, I talked about a novel I wrote, Your Love Incomplete,
right,
where
exactly.
I took the major arcana and used each chapter as one of the major arcana. So I began exploring the major arcana in a narrative form. But there is a problem with it. There is a problem with the tarot that it has no sort of fundamental text. So the tarot can be whatever you want it to be. And there is really an originating set of archetypes that were the tarot. And unfortunately, when you look at there's a lot of good books on the tarot, but a lot of them tend to be a little cookbookish. So what they're talking about is how to use the tarot in divination. And that's fine. And a lot of those books are good. When you're learning the tarot as a form of divination, you need those books. I use them. But there is something behind the tarot, and it's not just those 21 archetypes and the path. It's those two together. And so I didn't see anything out there in a film form that actually explored the Fool's Journey. So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to explore the Fool's Journey, so give a little bit of background. So there's a section on, there's an introduction on the origins, the archetypes, duality, and the structure. And then I go card by card, and I try and take the viewer through the experience of that journey, which is, in my opinion, now we can talk about how and why and all this, but it's a vision of medieval Renaissance Europe, that esoteric feeling that was under the undercurrent, the esoteric undercurrent, which explains a path to becoming conscious. And that's what I wanted to do with the film. It's ambitious. I mean, it's an ambitious film, and it's not for everyone. But I think for the listeners of this show, I hope for them it will resonate.
It resonated with me. It was really striking, and I enjoyed everything. It was like you're drawing, for me, from Jung and Manly P. Hall and David Feidler and so many things. And didn't you say through our emails that we had that you talked about the big dreams and everything that changed you? Didn't you have also not too long ago a DMT experience? Was this part of the inspiration? And maybe tell the audience about this.
Absolutely. It was very interesting because I finished the first 5 sections of the film, and I was living in China and in Russia, and then I got a job in Europe. So I came back to Europe, and I got stuck on the Fool. So where I am in northern Spain, Montsegur of the Cathars is not far. So I took my pilgrimage to Montsegur, and I walked the last 15 kilometers there. It's a fabulous, beautiful place. And I had a weekend off, and I always thought I had to go to Peru to do ayahuasca and DMT. And I pop into the computer, and boom, Barcelona. Come do ayahuasca and a stuff they call, and it's 5-MeO DMT. So to make a long story short, I get there, I do the ayahuasca that night. I have just a very powerful, difficult, horrible experience. But it just rips you open, the ayahuasca. It just tears the blood. And the next day, now the folks who did this were a bit psychoanalytical type, Argentine kind of, a lot of psychoanalysis in there. And then we did the DMT experience. So I've never heard anyone, because I studied a lot of this after, have such a long experience. So it's 5-MeO DMT. This comes from, it's like a toad. And you smoke it and you completely black out. But I was out. The whole thing lasted about 45 minutes when usually it should last about 10. So I woke up. So you go completely out black, and then you wake up. And when I woke up, I reached the other side completely. I thought I was done. I thought I never had to come back. I was absolutely sure. And I just screamed. And it's interesting because what I was seeing, people could hear me scream. And I kept saying, "You're fucking kidding me." Wow. It was that's all I could think. I said, "Is this it?" And they all said, "Yes, this is it." And it was the most unbelievable experience I've ever had. I mean, it has nothing to do with ayahuasca or mushrooms. It's a completely different. It's there's no comparison.
Oh, really?
It's being to the. Oh yeah, I mean, I was completely on the other side all the way through, and I learned. I can share one thing, and it's very curious. I kept falling down. Now, of course, afterward they told me this. I kept falling down, and in the experience, I was falling through, and everything kept just opening through the infinite. And I kept trying to hold on, and they kept saying, let go. And you disappear into this just ever constant infinite awakening. It's the infinite. And it's the most, oh my God. It has a lot of, the feeling was very kind of near-death experience. And one thing they did tell me afterwards, they said when I was out, my eyes were open and a fly walked over my eye, on my eyeball, and then kept going. So there was a certain fear, and I didn't have much of a pulse. There was a certain fear that maybe and to be out 40 minutes on DMT is a long time.
Wow, that's pretty intense. And how has that changed you since then? I'm sure it must have been a big deal. I mean, I had my Abraxas experience on ayahuasca, and it changed my life, and in some ways for the worse. I mean, I can feel the forces against me even as I woke up.
Oh my God, yeah. It's absolutely amazing, because I'll tell one part of the story that was interesting. When I came back, so as I came back, I thought it was all just a metaphor until a dog that had been there began licking my hand. And then I realized, oh shit, I'm back. And I became a little bit violent and a little bit vulgar. It was very interesting. Like there were some girls there, and I was saying vulgar things to them. And some guy was there, and I was provoking him. So it was fascinating. It was like coming back here. I had to confront all of this stuff that we have in us. So it wasn't, like you say, it wasn't the most, I mean, there was an absolutely amazing side to it, but then coming back was horrible. And since then, of course, fear of death, it's almost like I want to die. I just want to go back there. Get me out of here. Calgon, take me away. No, really. It's like when you experience that, you come back here and you can't share it with anybody. I mean, who do you share that with? You're going to go to your bartender and say, hey, man, I was at the Pleroma yesterday. Oh, great. Yeah, did you get yesterday? So, I mean, what are you going to do? And, and it makes you, it separates you a little bit from society. You feel that distance, and it's not easy to overcome. Yeah. So it's not all positive at all, but yeah, you have absolutely no fear of death.
Yeah. Fascinating. And I definitely can relate. And what would you advise for people who might be seeking this experience? For example, when people ask me about where they can get ayahuasca, I tell them, well, you make sure it's with a good group that has some pedigree, that has some elder shamans, not just go out and do it yourself. And of course, I mentioned when I did ayahuasca, it was with the Santo Daime group from Brazil, although they have chapters. And strange enough, in Illinois, there's there is a group in the country that does ayahuasca, and I did a session with them. But if people are looking for that kind of experience, what do you recommend? Anywhere you know yourself, Robert?
Yeah, I did it with a group. It's an Argentine group. If you just go into Google, put Argentine ayahuasca group. They actually, I do believe they operate in the U.S. I know they operate in Europe, all over Europe. I would somewhat recommend them. I mean, it was safe, it was controlled, but definitely do not do this by yourself. The other thing is, I would because there's DMT and there's 5-MeO DMT. The 5-MeO DMT is much more spiritual. But now there was recently a book. A guy just wrote a book about psychedelics. He's been doing the tour. I can't remember his name. Palin, I believe his name is.
I'm not
and
sure.
It's very, very interesting. When he was talking about the 5-MeO, he said he had a horrible experience. And I watched other people do the 5-MeO DMT. Don't do it until you're ready. You have to be ready to just give up. You have to yield to it. If you're not, it's like a little bit like a roller coaster. You know, there's a point where you just have to let go and enjoy the ride. I watched people with terror just screaming, I don't want to be here. Let me come back. So you have to be, it's not for everybody, and you have to be ready on a spiritual level. And I think you have to be a little bit ready kind of to give up some things. So yeah, it's definitely not for everybody. It's much more powerful than ayahuasca, because remember, this just completely it sends you to a different dimension, literally to a different dimension.
Wow. Well, yeah, and don't do it while you're driving. I gotta give me some of that, Robert. So, well, wonderful. So let's talk about the film. And I can tell you're inspired because I've done some film, even for work. I have had to do the scripts for film and do the interviews and cut down. And your narration it's crisp, it's excellent. I know how hard it is because we see films, but the truth is you've got to put so little dialogue in this film, so you got to make every word count. So I really enjoyed every section. Why don't we start with the archetypes? And this is one great line you had. You said, the way to know ourselves is to see our reflection in archetypes. Wow, that was great.
Yeah, I think that that section of the archetypes, it gives a good feel for the film, because what the major arcana are 22 very powerful Western archetypes. And to understand what the archetypes are, I mean, I look at it from a Platonic view and really a Pythagorean view. The sense of what is the ultimate archetype, I would say, is number. And it's a good metaphor. I mean, it's a good way to explore archetypes. So let's just start with numbers. Let's take, for example, the number 3. So we know this. Mathematics works. It explains the universe to a degree that's frightening. No, I mean the spin to 15 decimal places. But where are these numbers, and what are they? And what they are the building blocks of not just the universe, but of consciousness itself. No, but you can't really put your finger on it. You can't go out in the forest and say there's a 3, right? I mean, where is it? It doesn't exist.
Exactly.
They come now. This is a big philosophical question, and if folks can explore this, but it's very interesting. If you look at almost all mathematicians, they're all mystics, and when you ask them where are the numbers, they either say they don't know, or they just come out of the closet and say, "Look, I'm a Platonist, and these are forms that exist
Yes.
somewhere." And that's what the archetypes are. If you think of the archetypes that way, those, for example, the Virgin. I do a lot with the Virgin in the film. No, I show her in the processions in Spain, and then all the way back, to those original fertility goddesses, and then all the way up to whoever what I use, Ingrid Bergman or something. No, those are the building blocks of our consciousness. So if you want to understand yourself, you must understand the archetypes. And that's why the major arcana are so beautiful, because it's a collection of 21. And 21 is a nice number, no? So Now, I'm not saying that these are the ultimate or these are the only archetypes. Absolutely not. Of course not. That's silly. No, but it's a nice collection, and it can really help us to understand who we are. Because if you think about, we are made up of archetypes, and this is a good selection of them, I think.
Oh, I would certainly agree, and well said. And I think you also, in one section, talk about how we must wake up to our archetypes or they will use us. And that's even what Jung said, that archetypes are semi-aware, and the collective unconscious can bring us a lot of pain, not just interior, but it can actually change reality and punish us if we don't get in harmony with it.
Right. And he said, either you be conscious of them, or they will affect something to the effect that they will affect your lives and you will call them fate.
Right, exactly.
And remember, let's not forget Jung's definition of God, which was very interesting. It's the synchronicities in life. That's what, well, that was one of the, I mean, of course, that's not the definition of God, but it was a very interesting way to look at what is God. It's those synchronicities in life. Those moments when the universe, in a meaningful way, gives you a tap on the shoulder or a kick. No, that's where you find the transcendent point, and that's why it's absolutely crucial to understand them. Because if you don't, I mean, I use a Chanel ad. I mean, that's an incredibly well done ad. I think she's a famous model. She's in bed. She wakes up.
Right.
She has like a robe on. And she looks like a goddess. I mean, she's more than a woman. She's like Venus. And if you let them control you, they will. I mean, I used to do it. I used to work in advertising. I mean, we do it.
Yeah, you manipulated symbols and ideas and all that to create, to control others, to basically worship more money. You were actually part of the Archons at one time.
Yeah, I was. And it was very interesting because when I first got in it, I kept saying, oh, well, why don't we just tell people we're going to teach them how to trade options? And that doesn't work. No one wants to trade options. But people want to live that lifestyle, the car, the girl, the freedom. So that's what you sell. You don't sell trading options. You sell them. You are going to live the lifestyle. You are going to just have the beautiful girl in this car, and you're going to be the man. That's what people do. Yeah, here, I have to take my money. But if you say, I'm going to teach you how to trade options and, covered calls, and they're like, what? No, I'd rather go to a casino.
Yeah, back to the narrative. In that section of Archetypes, I love how you end it, or towards the end, you've got Beethoven's Ninth, the Ode to Joy, which of course reminds me of the great movie A Clockwork Orange, which such a beautiful song, but with such dark effects underneath it.
Right, and then the very end, I show that film by Leni Riefenstahl with the Munich rallies, and then I put at the end, just because I'm an old advertising guy, I had to throw in that BMW ad right at the end.
Yeah, powerful manipulation, but again, we must understand these archetypes. We must understand these symbols. I think that's one way to deprogram ourselves. And another section we would like to talk about, which I liked every section, was that of duality. And it was and it was a very interesting way of how you explain duality. Very elegant, very touching. Tell us about your section on duality.
Well, the section on duality was really affected by that DMT trip because there is a sense, at least because I did get kind of involved in Zen, where you transcend duality, but you can't transcend duality because duality is how we experience the world. And through that duality is how we become more and more aware. But there is sometimes, I think, a mistaken concept that you can reach some singular point where there is no duality. And I don't think that's true. I think the whole idea of the universe becoming conscious of itself, right? That is the as above, so below. That we're constantly becoming conscious and more conscious and more conscious, and it never ends. And that to become conscious, you must live in duality. Beyond duality, there's nothing. It's a difficult concept to hold on to, but It's crucial. That, and all esoteric thinking is just loaded with duality, loaded day and night, the sun and the moon, the zodiac. The zodiac is completely, it's just pure duality. And that's why a lot of modern astrologers, because I also do astrology, when they start playing around with rulerships, planet rulerships, they completely destroy that beautiful set of duality that is the zodiac, no?
Yeah, exactly. And I think you put it, again, very concise but very elegant. You say in the film, duality is the landscape and consciousness is the light that shines on it.
Right, exactly. That's what it is. No, that's what we experience. We experience the duality through our consciousness, and you have to embrace it. I don't believe you can run away from it. You've got to accept it, embrace it, and it does begin to open up. It just begins to speed up. It becomes exponential. No, that sense of awareness. So I wouldn't run from the duality. Chase it. Chase it. And you'll continually become more conscious.
Well said. Yeah, I think we had a guest, Stuart Douglas, and he was talking about there's a big trend. It's called spiritual bypassing, where everybody wants to go into the one. Everybody wants to be the man on top of the mountain, just like you said, pure Zen. And the truth is that, and Jung would agree, we are in this world to get psychic healing, to get wholeness. And that means really, as you said, finding all our different dualities and bringing them together.
Right. Exactly. It's finding that balance. And once you have that balance, you can continue to move forward, because you'll never reach beyond it, but it will just continue to open up. The doors keep opening. Like I had in that experience, I kept falling and wanting to grab, and the push was keep going and keep going. It's a different feeling when you're looking for a singularity than when you're just open to just constant expansion through more and more, because each duality opens up onto another duality and another one and another one. And if you fight that, you're going to get stuck.
Agreed. And that's it in the Gnostic myths. People talk about why they're so Byzantine and Baroque with these eternal aeons and archons, and it's level after level. And in one text, well, there's a God above God. And then there's a later text that says, well, there's actually a God above God above God. So that's what the Gnostics were doing. Say this thing might never end in this life or another, but like you, we just got to keep falling and letting go and evolve throughout the universe.
Exactly. And I think there's one point in the film where I use that Dali painting of it's of what was his wife's name? I'm forgetting her name now.
I'm not sure.
You see her, and then you see her in front sitting on a chair, but she's just like a skeleton, like a model. No? And then that goes on to another one and another one and another one. It's like in the film, I use that quote from where I show Campbell speaking, where he talks about, what is that point? It's Brahman. We call it God, but that's a personification of it. No? And that personification works to a certain extent. But at some point you got to move beyond that. But beyond that, it's not like you reach the promised land. Because if you fall into that trap, that promised land becomes heaven, which is not the infinite. As Campbell says in the film.
Yeah, well said. And I think we're talking before about government and people, and I always say don't look for heroes or saviors. Don't look for that endpoint or that guru. These people you meet, whether they're questionable people in the past that you're reading or people today, they're teachers in the way stations as we evolve. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. That's a little bit the tower card, no? What's that Zen saying? When you meet the Buddha, slay him?
Exactly.
That's what happens in the tower card. And that, for many Christians, how many Christians are there that, like, for example, me, I think there's thousands of us who were raised believing in a physical Jesus, and it worked.
Mm-hmm.
It worked to a certain extent, but then we had to leave. But now we come back. I would consider myself a Christian. And this film, I think, has a strong Christian element, but it's a different Christianity, no? It's not it's a completely different. It's just a whole different picture. No, you go back and you look at it and you're like, how didn't I see that? No. So just remember, it will, and maybe at some point I'll move beyond this. I hope I do. But breaking that first time is so important. Allowing the dogma just to crack and fall down, slaying that first Buddha is difficult. The second one's not so bad. The third one, it's like whack, the head's gone.
You're a serial killer.
Exactly. You're a serial Buddha killer. And when you're a serial Buddha killer, you're definitely on the path.
Well said indeed. And you mentioned the section, the tower. Maybe explain the audience about that. Of course, I completely loved it because you had a beautiful rendition of Where Is My Mind by the Pixies.
Right. Yes. That for me, for your audience, because I know there's a lot of folks in your audience who are probably interested in alchemy. So I took the tower card and I explained it in other sections that it's the death of all of the dogma. But I use no voiceover. So it's those scenes from Fight Club when at the very end, when all the buildings are collapsing, I mix in Building 7. And then I use footage from the Iraq War by, the documentarian, the German documentarian, Werner Herzog, no? And you see all that smoke and fire, and then at the end, Liberty Tower emerges, no? So it's the alchemic I put the whole alchemic process in the section on the tower. Now that's not now there's not conspiracy there, so don't put me on the Alex Jones list. They'll ban me. It's really not about that. It's just about that whole feeling of destruction and who really destroyed, no? Because in the end, we are the terrorists and we are we're the victim and the terrorist. And that's the alchemic process. You get the victim and the terrorist, you mix them together, and something comes out of that. And that keeps happening again and again and again. And that's what I try and show in the tower.
Yes, and of course, the ending of Fight Club is one of my favorite endings. I wrote an article about Gnostic themes in Fight Club, and I break it down and everything. But the ending is so powerful. I see this sort of Christ figure and Sophia figure who are finally together. The bridal chamber, the union, of course, all of reality is collapsing. The dark magic that is money is collapsing.
Exactly. And it just kaboom. No, it all goes down. Yeah, he just did a podcast with Joe Rogan today. That's fabulous.
Oh,
what's his
really?
name? Chuck Palahniuk.
Yes.
Fabulous.
I'll have to check it out.
That guy is absolutely brilliant. And he really is. He pushes the limits to a way that he's very Gnostic. One thing I would like to ask your listeners, just one favor. I can't do social media. It just makes me crazy. So if you do watch the film and they like it, if they could post it on Facebook and Twitter and all that, because I just can't deal with that. It's just too much for me. So I have a page. I created some page from so there is a page on Facebook for the film. So if you do like the film, if they could just kind of spread the word on social media, because that's somewhere I just can't deal with.
You're full of Sophia. So yeah, great. As we end for the audience, where can they find your film or the rest of Robert Bonomo?
Yeah, so on YouTube, just put in the 21 Faces of God, and you'll come to the channel, which is Robert Bonomo, Cactus Land. And the film is in long form version, and then there's a serialized version, and you have the 27 parts. So, however, if you're really feeling inspired, it's dense, though. I think we'd all agree it's a dense film. So it's kind of hard to watch in one sitting, but if you feel inspired, you'll see that all there. And then I've got, there's one channel there where I have my interviews and stuff that I'm doing on the film. So it's all there. It's the 21 Faces of God on YouTube. You'll see the channel there. And if you want to look at my writing, for example, that article about banking, that's on thecactusland.com. You'll see all my articles. And there's an article I just wrote recently about the tarot there. So that's up there too.
Yeah, definitely check out Robert's content is always very good, and he definitely walks the path, that middle and same path of the Gnostics, the heretic of the heretics. That's what you'll always be, Robert, with the rest of us here at the Virtual Alexandria. So I think we've come to the end of a great interview. Vance, thanks for joining us here in this Lunatic Fringe.
Oh, that was great. Well, I belong right here with you two guys. That's for
Thanks
sure.
a lot, man.
Oh, Robert, glad to meet you, and fascinating stuff. Love it.
Great.
Yes, Robert.
And thanks a lot, Miguel.
Oh, Robert, thanks for coming here. As always, I really enjoyed talking to you, and we certainly look forward for the next time we get another opportunity.
Absolutely. You're doing great work, Miguel. We all love you.
Thank you. Thank you. And there you have it, the first part of our interview with Robert Bonomo on his superb and evocative and mystic film, The 21 Faces of God. Again, you can find it for free on YouTube or check out our show notes. In our second part, Robert will give us his views on conspiracy theories, including his disdain for certain right-wing conspiracies, but his support of letting Alex Jones have a platform. And what about 9/11? We'll go deeper into his ideas on certain tarot cards like the Hierophant, Judgment, and the Devil, and what he thinks of the Crowley deck. Surprising no one, we'll also go deeper into Joseph Campbell and C.G. Jung, as well as deeper into certain Kabbalistic and Cathar ideas. Robert views himself as a Christian, but he'll share his unique alchemical view on Jesus. And he'll tell us the process of making the 21 Faces of God, which includes how each one of us can easily make our own occult cinema. Lastly, Robert will share what he sees as the meaning of life, and it's very powerful. So please become a member or patron at Patreon for the full dope and so many other benefits. Just go to thegodabovegod.com for these and other means of support. This Red Pill Cafeteria is 100% audience supported, and I can't do it without you. We're all in this together. Divided we stand, but together we rise. Above the clouds of archon illusion, with wings not made of wax, but our stories, dreams, and the desire for an unapologetic freedom. Isn't that right, Dorothy? Again, for members and non-members, we end with some very powerful music by the talented band Future Primitives. Specifically and appropriately, a song called Black Iron Prison. Thanks for being here, and thanks for being yourself, your true self. Hello and goodbye as always.
Hey the medicine in his eyes.